So God gives to mankind this test. He puts him in the garden, tells you to work and keep it. That's Genesis 2, verse 15. We're kind of like to be priests of God in his macro temple. But then he says, and he sets out this test in verse 16 and 17, the Lord commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in that day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. So there's the test. Will you obey me? Now, there's probably a lot that's behind this. First of all, remember that we're not alone here. We've never been alone here. We're not alone in the universe. I know that that's debated in our society quite a bit, but the Bible's really clear that he created this whole host of beings that are called angels, and the bad angels are called demons. The Bible speaks quite a bit about them. So there had been a rebellion that took place before we got here, and that rebellion was led by the chief angel, the most powerful created being in the universe, which his name was Lucifer. Now notice I say created. God was uncreated and God's more powerful, but Lucifer is the most powerful created being. In Isaiah chapter 14, in a very strange prophecy, Isaiah tells us that the devil, or Lucifer, or Satan, staged a rebellion in heaven where he wanted to be God. And he wanted to set his throne above these created angelic beings. So he staged a rebellion, and God basically threw him out of heaven. Ezekiel 28 also speaks of the same rebellion. So there has already been a rebellion in heaven because the angels disobeyed God, and a third of them went with the devil unto his rebellion. So now God creates man. He creates man in his image, and he says, here's your command. The command is, you can eat any tree, but don't eat this one. I want to see if you will obey me. It's a very simple test. And you can't miss the tree because it's right in the middle of the garden. God didn't withhold things from them. He said, look, all these trees are here. They're beautiful. You can eat them. They're good for the eye. They're pleasing. Just that one. Don't eat that tree. Because the consequence of that is you're definitely going to die. That's all it took. Now, what's interesting is Paul picks this theme up in Romans chapter 7 when he talks about his struggle with sin. And there in Romans chapter 7, Paul talks about how this commandment, now through, I would say, like the voice of Adam, Paul is kind of pretending like he's Adam. He goes ahead and he talks about this commandment not to eat the tree. So that would be to covet it, to take it, to want it, to eat it. And in his argument to the Romans about the law, Paul refers back to this. So it's Romans 7, verse 7. There it says, what then shall we say that the law is sin? In other words, was the commandment of God not to eat the tree, was that the bad thing? He says, by no means. Yet if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. For I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. So now he's taking the law which comes later under Moses, like 1450 BC, and he's using that as to illustrate that. He's going to go all the way back to the original command of God, which is don't eat of this fruit. But yet you'll find in chapter 3, Eve and then Adam are going to covet it, take it, and eat it. And so because God made a law, small l, don't eat the tree, later on in the law, capital L, one of the 10 commandments is going to be do not covet. And that's why Paul picks this particular commandment in Romans 7. Romans 7 verse 8, but sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. And so what Paul is talking about to the church, to the Roman believers, is now that sin is within us, because God says don't do it, we want to do it. And yet this seized our forefather Adam, who hadn't yet sinned, and he had a fighting chance, and he looks at this tree and he decides somehow in his heart the same thing the devil had decided, which is, I want to be the master of my own fate. So I'm going to look at this and I'm going to eat this. So it's interesting that Paul picks the same thing up. And of course, if you eat it, you will surely die. And that winds up becoming not just physical death, which is bad enough, but it also separates us from God and is going to thrust Adam and Eve out of the Holy Holies, out of God's temple, out of God's presence, and all the rest of history is a result of eating bad fruit.